They call me and I go. It is a frozen road past midnight, a dust of snow caught in the rigid wheel tracks. The door opens. I smile, enter, and shake off the cold. Here is a great woman on her side in the bed. She is sick, perhaps vomiting, perhaps laboring to give birth to a 10th child. Joy, joy. Night is a room darkened for lovers. Through the jalousies, the sun has sent one golden needle. I pick the hair from her eyes and watch her misery with compassion.
Thank you. You read that so beautifully. I wonder if we could start by talking about the doctor poet, and maybe about the doctor's eye, the poet's eye, the doctor's attention, the poet's attention.
Well, this poem is such a wonderful place to start that kind of conversation, Lisa. I think in so many ways this poem really enacts both perspectives, really the vision of the poet and the doctor's way of seeing. It's a cold night. You know, the title of the poem is Complaint, so there's this sense of, you know, immediate.
Who's complaining?
Who's complaining? What's the distance? You know, and clearly there's a journey. You know, there is a kind of distance, and you know, in medicine we often think of what's the patient's chief complaint.
Right. That's, you know, when I've read this poem many times before, I've thought, oh, the title names the patient's complaint,
yes,
to which a doctor responds, and yet this poem begins with a guy who's been awakened
exactly
in the middle of the night.
His complaint, you know, is he complaining about this in some sense?
Yes.
So there's a wonderful possibility
brings them
there
together.
Bringing them together, right? That they're both in some state of distress, perhaps at the beginning of the poem, certainly. And then I think what happens through this journey is the speaker is in some ways transformed and comes into his voice as poet as well, as empathetic listener, and presence really in the poem. And so the frigid, you know, landscape is traversed. He arrives, shakes off the cold, and then he experiences the patient, the woman, this great woman in bed, suffering. And he's drawn, I think, to this experience and wants to be present for her, not just as the doctor with his detached concern and thinking about, you know, what the medical diagnosis is here. And in fact, there's some ambiguity about that. Is
yes.
she laboring? Is she ill? What's really happening?
Yes.
And then he realizes that this is a transcendent moment in this woman's life.
Just the beginning. They call me and I go. It is a frozen road past midnight, a dust of snow caught in the rigid wheel tracks. It's clean.
Oh, it's so clean and so spare and so precise. And even the way he uses enjambment in the poem and the way the lines are broken. That first line is and stopped with a period. They call me and I go. And there's
and
a
what
real
kind of
sense
statement is that? What is it?
Very sort of matter of fact, you know, almost a resigned to my duty. They call me and I go. It's a kind of almost a kind of automatic response, and it's very familiar.
I'm a doctor, that's what I do.
That's what I do.
This is what I do, and that means I get in the car.
Exactly, and I get in the car, and then, as you're suggesting, I think, Lisa, then the world starts to open up, and even though still at the beginning of the poem, we're in a very spare world, it's a very stark landscape.
I think it's quite fascinating that to be a doctor is to be in the car.
Yes, exactly, and to be, you know, sort of in that world and coming to the patient, which these days is rare, although more and more of us in primary care are visiting patients in their homes again.
Correct me if you think I'm wrong. For me, these opening lines are those of a clinical seer,
yes,
of a competent,
yes,
of a competent physician, yes, who knows,
yes,
how to do what he and discharging his duty smoothly and expertly.
Absolutely, I think that's really,
as a technician.
Yes, and as again, you know, a precise observer. And I think, you know, that period, you know, it's the only real punctuation in the poem except for those wonderful exclamation points later on. But I think that's a signal too that, let me put a point on this. Let me, I'm looking closely at what I'm seeing here, and it's a more kind of detached view, I think, of the world. And
there's a habit of mind.
A habit of mind, and that's what we do in medicine. We observe, and then we formulate, and we then make our diagnosis and treat. But Williams, takes us through that process, certainly. But then something happens in the last part of that.
The door opens, I smile, enter, and shake off the cold. And there's another ritual being enacted. It has its automatic quality as well. This has happened many times before. The door opens.
Yeah, it's another house call. It's a way of kind of evoking that for us. And he is at once the doctor and performing a ritual. But then he's starting to defrost in a way. I mean, he's shaking off the cold. So he's transforming in his role in a way.
Yeah.
He's still the clinician, and that's his primary duty. But he's becoming a witness at the same time, I think.
Yes.
And that's shaking off the cold. That part of the ritual is I think also part of the transformation that, or maybe
he's shaking off his distance, his coldness.
Yes.